For joining us. John O'Dwyer is the president of the Ancient Order of Hibernians. Is it the Louisville chapter or Kentucky chapter?
We're Division I Louisville. There are two. There's one out in Lexington that we recently started a couple of years ago, and we'll be heading to Bardstown next to try to start one down there.
Great, great. The Ancient Order of Hibernians is one of their key events that they're known for is the Irish Parade. In the spring this year, St. Patrick's Day. You'll have to look for that next year. So John, I'm going to hand it over to you. You can tell us about the Hibernians and their connection to Bloody Monday and an overview.
Excellent. The AOH, and I'll keep it on the short side, just so make it easy for everybody, was started in Ireland originally after King Henry VIII split from the Catholic Church, and it was very protectionist of the priests and the Catholics because of the outlaw, excuse me, of the Catholic faith. In 1836, we came to the States, and much again a protectionist organization because of the influx of the Irish, who were coming over, and let's just keep it simple, were being abused or indentured slaves, etc. So the need was here. Over decades, we morphed into a more benevolent organization, still keeping hold to our roots, and but helping others without regard to demographic as we've grown forward. Mention of the St. Patrick's Parade here in Louisville. Our particular division, although it's only about 50, 60 years old now, we've been here since the mid-1800s and have held 3 national conventions here. The latest one was in 2018. And the parade itself is part of our 501c3 charity. It's one of the very few, and I use very few. I don't know of another one, but I'll never be an absolute. That's a private charity run parade, not run by a corporation or anything like that, and still run by the AOH. So we're pretty proud of it, and that'll be March 12th next year. So mark your calendar. With that, I'll just give you as high an overview as I can. I'm sure during discussion time, you're going to dive into a lot of details on Bloody Monday. I will give you what normally people ask about. Being a kid from Brooklyn, I usually refer people to, if you ever see the movie Gangs in New York, you're probably on the right track to understanding what's happened here in Louisville. August 6, 1855, there had been some skirmishes around Louisville, and skirmish could be individually or groups, causing mayhem the months leading up to August 6th. But on August 6th, it kind of came to a head. We were coming on election day, and although if you read some text, they list it specifically as Protestants, there were many different demographics involved in what we know now as the Know Nothing Party, also was known as the American Party, much like you may have seen in the movie. They were very, very scared about the influx of German and Irish coming into Louisville, especially around election time, and feeling like that the immigrants were going to take over somehow. There was a lot of inflammatory writings done in the Louisville Journal at the time, and the editor was George Prentice. He used to have a statue out in front of the library that no longer is there. You can make your own opinions whether we need to remove a statue or not, but it was there. And his journal and his words led to some incitement. He was part of the Know Nothing. According to what the journal had in front of them, basically stated on the morning was it the city was in possession of an armed mob and base passions, which were infuriated to the highest pitch by the incendiary appeals of the newspaper organ and the popular leaders of the Know Nothing Party. So there was a group that were banded together to ensure that they would not lose any power and make everybody know that they still ran the city. The first incident that we know of, there was a general fighting going on Shelby Street, which went from Main to Broadway. Depending, and I'll say this up front, depending on which source you look at, there may be some that say 14 people were shot and killed, some say 23. In doing research around Bloody Monday, I think the only thing I personally walked away from is we don't technically really know how many people passed away on that day, considering also that usually your sources were coming from the organizations that were behind the mayhem. So take anything you want from that and glean it, but there's more to be learned, so you can give you something to go look for. But on that part where Shelby was, the speculation is that there was 14 or so people shot, including an officer at the time. About 4 o'clock later that day, a crowd armed with guns, at that time would have been shotguns, some muskets and other handguns. They proceeded to attack the German parish at the time, which was St. Martin of Tours. The mayor at the time, Barbie, was part of the Know Nothings. He, as they were going to attack the parish, he dissuaded them from doing so. I think he understood if they crossed that line, they were going to lose a lot of support. There was also a reverend that's noted to have been killed during that from flying rocks and debris. Late in the afternoon, it moved down towards Main Street, where in the Irish neighborhood, they started firing repeated volleys. The Irish did from their windows to try to defend themselves, and that brought on even more mayhem. Irishman who discharged the pistol, this one I'm fairly certain we know surely, was shot and hung down there, although the reports that are written say he actually survived it. But they wanted to make him an example to the rest of the immigrants that they were in charge. One of the famous parts of the uprising, or the disturbance, whatever word you want to use, happened what we call Quinn's Row. That was down on Main Street. It was a row house area that was predominantly housing Irish immigrants. There were some Germans in there as well. And it happened between 10th and 11th is really where we know what it was. The owner was Patrick Quinn. They set flames to the row, and the flames actually reached across the street. Reports listed have that approximately 12 or so buildings were destroyed in the fire. Part of the heinous part of that were, if there were Irish inside the buildings and some Germans, and forgive me, I tend to lean on the Irish side just because that's who we are, but I don't discount anybody else. But as they were trying to run from the buildings, reports say that they were actually shot as they were coming out. There are also reports that some people that made it out were thrown back in. And I think this is where you'll get the conflicting number of fatalities that day, as they're not totally sure how many would make it out. Obviously, there were some people shot and wounded and couldn't even come out at all. Mayor Barbie later on in the day, and again, he was part of the Know Nothings. He saw all the carnage that was going on, and again, a move was made to go against the Cathedral of the Assumption downtown. He saw it and tried to intervene, because again, I think he knew at that point, if they went after the cathedral, that would have turned the tide, and if you remember Gangs of New York, they lined up in front of the churches at the end of that part of the movie, and that's where they drew their line. But we don't have anything that says they actually lined up in front of the churches here in Louisville, but you can understand that some were probably down there ready to protect both of them. By that time, after they were doing that, there was extreme vandalism all over the city. There was reportedly at least 100 businesses and homes that were vandalized. They were robbed or burned down, and most notably, again, Quinn's Row was the major part of that. Now, Bishop Martin Spalding was the bishop at the time. He was the one where if you do some research, where you'll see 14, 22, 23. It was Bishop Martin that actually was one of the people that spoke out and said that he believed that the death toll was well over 100 people. So again, you have to figure out what reports you're looking at and take what you want from each one of those. Actually, towards the end of the day, the dead were actually stored where Louisville Metro Hall is, which was the Jefferson County Courthouse, or as we know it now as the mayor's office. They were stored there, and then they moved out from there. That was definitely a stronghold point for the know-nothings, but that's where they decided to put the bodies and then have them in repose somewhere. After the major attacks, excuse me, were done, there were still skirmishes around the city, but nothing like what happened for most of the day until it grew quiet. The point to be noted above everything else is that no one was ever prosecuted, and no one was ever truly held to blame for all of it. James Speed, which is a famous name here, had become the mayor after election, subsequently ousted out of office, left the city. He actually became a Catholic after he married his wife, and they left for Chicago, and he's never come back to the city after that. The impact on Louisville from the day's events was pretty profound. You saw a mass exodus out of the city of Louisville, of both Irish and German. Most that we know of went to St. Louis, Chicago, Milwaukee, and Cincinnati, and settled down in there. And there's reports that Prairie City, Kansas was also a stopping point for a lot of the folks that left. The exodus continued up through the breakout of the Civil War, and it was thought that that was the reason why the exodus stopped, because of the need for business and the need for people to work here in Louisville. A lot of businesses after that shut down because there was nobody here, but at least the exodus stopped. Part of what we know is, because of this event in the exodus, Louisville, which had been a very thriving big city, honestly was passed by the likes of Cincinnati and St. Louis. So we don't know if this didn't happen, if Louisville would have been as big or bigger than those cities, but we do know that the people leaving went there, and we find ourselves in the demographic that we have today. Back in 1995, our president in the AOH, Paul Whitty, had applied for the Bloody Monday marker down on 10th Street, Main and 10th. And with the help of the German American Club here in town and AOH, they raised the funds to put the marker down there, which is right where Quinn's Row would have been. And it's been there ever since. We have done in the past on St. Patrick's Day proper, a remembrance on St. Patrick's Day, and then had a piper march us through the streets where we would go over to Patrick O'Shea's to also celebrate St. Patrick's Day. We have subsequently decided to move that. We want to do it on the day proper, because we think it stands on its own and we don't need to mix it up with St. Patrick's Day. But that's the kind of the 30,000 foot level. I hope that was sufficient for everybody, because there's so many details that I have left out, but I'm sure you're going to have a grand discussion over it.
That's perfect, John. Thank you so much. And thank you for joining us prior to your Hibernian meeting.
No worries, no worries. I probably did a poor job compared to Mike McGuire, who was going to do it. He's one of our very good historical folks, but due to family issues, he could not be in town. So I am the poor substitute for Mike.
And we were glad to have you. So thank you very much, and good luck with your meeting.
All right, I appreciate it. I'll try to hang on here for a couple of minutes, but if I jump out, you know where I'm going.
Yeah, that's great. Actually, I'm going to piggyback on some of what you said from the Catholic perspective. So I'm Tim Toms. I'm the archivist for the Archdiocese of Louisville, and I am not an expert on Bloody Monday, but I've nearly every day I get a call from someone asking about Bloody Monday. So I have developed an understanding and history of it. Some of what John had said, I'm going to piggyback on, but just to give you some background on what was going on in the nation during leading up to Bloody Monday. So there was a large movement across the U.S. of native pride called nativism. And that, for a Catholic, that computed into Catholics being persecuted in the United States because we were viewed as being foreigners. The Catholics were kind of an exotic foreign faith. We spoke a different language during our worship, Latin. We had a foreign leader, the Pope, and who at the time was a temporal leader in Italy. He still ruled over much of Italy. Many viewed the Pope, the Church, most Catholics, especially the immigrants, 2/3 of which was Irish and Catholics, German Catholics, they viewed us all as one, and they viewed us as not being Americans. But Catholics hardly had the majority. In Louisville, during the 1850 census, so 5 years before Bloody Monday, there were 12,500 Germans and only 3,100 Irish. Of the churches, again, we were really in the minority. There were 800 Baptist churches in Kentucky, 530 Methodist, 224 Presbyterian, 111 disciples, Christians. I think that's Disciples of Christ, maybe, and only 48 Catholic churches in Kentucky in around 1850. So again, we were the minority, but Catholic, Irish and German immigrants were pouring into the United States, and especially into Kentucky, and people thought we were going to take over everything. At the time of Bloody Monday, of the 33 churches and 1 synagogue in Louisville, only 7 were Roman Catholic. So again, we were not the majority. Catholics were not the majority in the city. These next couple slides are not really pertaining to Louisville, but of the view of Catholics across the nation. So here's a slide of the Pope being depicted as coming on shore in America and sort of attacking the Native Americans. The next one, which I find it kind of comical, but I'd never seen it until today, but they call this the Catholic crocodiles. You can look real close at the crocodiles, and it's actually the bishops of the church coming on shore in America. So of course that was not the case, but fear will do a lot, will cause a lot of havoc with people's minds, and this is what they thought was happening. So John talked a little bit early about the cathedral and Bishop Spalding and Mayor Barbie. So here on the left, we have a drawing of the cathedral, of what it looked like around the 1850s. This is actually the only drawing we have of the cathedral, of how it looked during that time period. Right now, the cathedral is red brick, but when it was first built, it was covered in stucco and had a nice iron fence in the front with a nice front yard. And that's what you see here. And then our bishop at the time was Bishop Martin Spalding in the middle there. He was the bishop that saw to it that the construction of the cathedral was completed. So the building of the cathedral was kind of one of his crowning glories. And then we have Mayor John Barbie, the 10th mayor of Louisville. So Mayor Barbie, during Bloody Monday, Mayor Barbie and two councilmen had accused the Catholics of hiding armed men and ammunitions in the cathedral undercroft. And to put those rumors to rest and to make sure that no harm came to the cathedral, Bishop Spalding handed the keys over to Mayor Barbie and personally held him responsible should any harm come to the cathedral. So the city representatives, they searched the cathedral from top to bottom, looked in all the nooks and crannies. And at that time, the undercroft was, it was a dirt floor, and Presentation Academy was formed in the basement. So there was a school down there, but of course, no armed men, and there was no stockpile of ammunitions were found. And Mayor Barbie made a formal public statement to say that the cathedral is not holding ammunition for use. We assume the keys were returned that day or maybe the next day, I'm not sure when. But that was a big moment in the cathedral's history. John mentioned earlier about the German section of downtown that surrounded St. Martin of Tours Catholic Church, which is on the corner of Shelby Street and Gray Street, just a half a block north of Broadway. Cannons were rolled to the doors of St. Martin's, and St. Martin's was one of several German parishes in downtown Louisville. St. Boniface was also a German parish, really just a stone's throw from there, and no pun intended, but what John was mentioning earlier about, he said the reverend that was hit by the stones, that was actually Father Boswald. He was a German priest from Bavaria. He was born in Bavaria in 1820, and during Bloody Monday, he was on his way back from attending to a parishioner, and he was pretty much stoned with rocks and Lord knows what else. During the riots, he was attacked. One of those stones or rocks hit him in the hip. And while he did not die during Bloody Monday, the stone that hit his hip created an abscess, and it became infected, and then he ended up contracting typhoid fever, and he died about 3 months after Bloody Monday. He is buried in St. John's Cemetery in Portland. So he was 35 years of age when he died. And there you can see his tombstone in St. John. St. John is not a very well-known cemetery, but it's one of our most historic, and it's pretty easy to find. If you know where the former St. Cecilia Catholic Church was located. The church is still there, but it's no longer St. Cecilia's. The cemetery is located about a block away behind the church. And here's a more recent depiction of the mob scenes that surrounded St. Martin of Tours. Can't miss that steeple in the east part of downtown. The next priest that we know that was involved in Bloody Monday was Father Thomas Joyce. John mentioned him earlier. He was born in County Mayo in Ireland in 1826. When he arrived in Kentucky, shortly after his arrival, he was ordained after attending seminary in St. Mary's College in Marion County. He was ordained in 1851. After his ordination, he was assigned to the cathedral, but from the cathedral, he was instructed to create a new congregation called St. Patrick's. He was also involved with Immaculate Conception, which was not far from the cathedral on 8th Street. But he is the founding priest of St. Patrick's, and seen here is the first church of St. Patrick's, which also served a dual purpose as the school building. So it was probably a temporary church building. I've also read that he erected a framed church. I'm not sure if there was an earlier, a wooden structure before what you see here, but this was known as the first church, and I guess you could call that a framed church. It looks like it's made of brick and stucco to me. But this actually was only demolished in 2004. So not that long ago. It's a parking lot now. We did not demolish it. The church has actually not owned this property for several years. The church that, the current church, which you can see on the left of the picture of the original St. Patrick Church, is currently owned by Dismas Charities. It's on the corner of 13th Street and Market. It's kind of an orange brick structure with a nice rose window. And it's very well cared for, but immediately behind the church is a parking lot where this original first church and school structure was. So Father Thomas Joyce, seen here, he was born in 1826, and he too attended St. Mary's College in Marion County. He was instructed to form the new congregation of St. Patrick's, and during Bloody Monday, when the mob was making their way towards the west part of downtown in the vicinity of St. Patrick's, the church was attacked, although it was not damaged to a great degree. Father Joyce was hung. He was strung up and hung, but was immediately cut down. He did not die. He recovered from any injuries that he might have sustained. He lived several more years till 1868, and he died at age 42. He too is buried at St. John. So when I read that he was strung up and hung at the church, it if you've ever seen the movie Angels and Demons from the book by Dan Brown, there's a scene in there where someone is strung up and hung, and that's although probably maybe as dramatic, but maybe not. That's kind of the awful scene that comes to my mind. And of course, Father John Quinn, John too, mentioned a little bit about John. Unfortunately, actually, Father John Quinn, he died 3 years before Bloody Monday ever took place. And so we don't have a photo of John, but we're not sure exactly the year of his birth, but he was born in Ireland, immigrated to the United States about 1830. He was ordained, and he spent his entire career at the former St. Louis Church, which was on site of the cathedral there on 5th Street. When the cathedral was built, it was built right on top of St. Louis, and we say we had a cathedral within a cathedral. So as the walls of the cathedral went up, then the St. Louis church was torn down and taken out the front door. But the same year that the cathedral was completed, there was a cholera outbreak in Louisville. And a lot of the clergy and the sisters of the women religious in downtown, they attended and nursed the sick people of Louisville, which meant that a lot of them contracted cholera themselves and they died. And that's what happened to John Quinn. He died in November 1852, and he is buried in the cathedral. Some years after John died, he was sort of forgot about, and in the 1920s, some pipe fitters were digging in the cathedral undercroft, and they hit the rounded top of his tomb there that you see, and rediscovered John Quinn. So he went missing a few years, but ever since we've kept our eye on him. But Father Quinn was very popular, and he was known to be a very trustworthy individual. And a lot of his parishioners sort of used him as a bank. And they entrusted their savings to him, and they used him as sort of a savings account, and he would negotiate with them a percentage of the principal, sort of like interest. So he would invest the principal savings, the principal deposit, and then take a little bit off of the profit from when the depositor would withdraw their money. And so over time, he created for himself a pretty good savings account. When he died in 1852, he had a brother, Francis Quinn, also called Frank. Now, earlier, John mentioned Patrick, and I have heard both names. I've heard of Patrick Quinn, and I've heard of Frank Quinn. So I'm not sure which one was his name. Maybe it was Francis Patrick or Patrick Francis, but in the information that I have in the archives, it says Francis Quinn. Frank inherited his brother's estate, and with those funds, he used it to purchase the row of houses between 11th and 12th Street on Main Street, sort of in the vicinity of where the Kentucky Lottery headquarters is right now. So there was the row of houses and apartments called Quinn's Row. And of course, Quinn's Row is the famous structure, one of the most famous structure that was burned to the ground during the riots. The tragic thing with Quinn's Row is that it was a residence hall. It was one home after another. They were all connected, one after the other. And the homes were barricaded and the residents were not allowed to escape. Imagine people jumping from windows or babies being thrown from the second or third floor. It probably didn't have a third floor, but imagine mothers tossing their babies out the window. It was that type of awful, awful scenario. When Frank Quinn tried to leave the building himself, he was shot dead in the threshold and laid there and burned. It was just very, very awful, very awful. And there's a picture of it from the Louisville Herald in 1922, burning down. Right where the lottery headquarters is right now. People go there and collect their lottery winnings, and they have no idea of the historic event that happened right there on that site. So throughout Louisville, downtown Louisville, there are a number of sites where you can take the bus if you'd like. This is a map of the downtown sites associated with Bloody Monday. You can start with number 1 at Louisville Gardens, and then go over to St. Boniface and the Shelby and Liberty Streets area, and hit the churches of what's called the New Lou area now. There's the municipal buildings, there's the brewery. Of course, then you skip over to the west side of downtown Louisville for St. Patrick's, in that area. So many of these sites are still there, and you can visit them now and remember and memorialize the lives that were lost during Bloody Monday. And with that, I am going to hand it over to our next presenter, Gerald F. McDaniel, Esquire, author of AINDREAS, the Messenger. Take it away, Jerry.
Okay, I'm Gerald McDaniel. I wrote the book AINDREAS, the Messenger. I'd like to thank the Jeffersonville Township Public Library and Falls of the Ohio Genealogical Society for co-sponsoring an event like this, a discussion of a serious subject you don't hear talked about too much, and I'm happy to be here. A number of years ago, I wrote a novel called AINDREAS the Messenger, which was a narrative about pernicious myths and about people who believed in them and did terrible things in service of those myths. And I want to share with you a few insights I experienced in my research and in the writing of that book. One thing that is nice to keep close to you as a rule of thumb is Will Rogers' famous saying, "It isn't what we don't know that hurts us, it's what we know that ain't so." It's something we always ought to keep in mind and apply it to anything controversial or something you have reservations about. It was a remarkable event, really, Bloody Monday. I was intending to write a book about an adolescent, 13-year-old Andreas Rivers, a boy or a young man, whatever you prefer, who maybe he wasn't consciously aware of it, but he was searching for the Holy Grail. It's a Grail search. And as I went on with the book and had been fascinated for years with these little rumors I'd heard, or little unfinished sentences and little squibs in the newspaper about that terrible day back in 1855, it was irresistible to tie the two together. And now, allow me to explain this little subplot. I'll do it very briefly, because some of you may have already read the book, and maybe it would give you a different slant. And those of you who might be interested in reading it, I think it might be to your benefit. This has to do with Arthurian legend, King Arthur, Knights of the Round Table, and all that. Centuries ago, and it was French, the story came down about the fool who was picked to rescue the kingdom. The Fisher King was hurt, and he wasn't getting any better. He was wounded. He was a great warrior. And a fool was selected to go forth in search of the Holy Grail, and he would have to do certain things. One, he met Blanche Fleur, which translates, I think, to white flower, who was to be the love of his life. But this is a woman against whom he would measure against any woman he ever met for the rest of his life. He met someone who served as his helper. He had to kill the Red Knight, and he had to secure the Holy Grail. And when he did so, then the king's wound on his leg would be healed and the kingdom would be saved. Now, Carl Jung, the famous psychoanalyst and psychologist and philosopher, said that some stories are so enduring because they contain elemental truths that come true in society. And this is one of those stories. So Andreas is anything but a fool. He's 13 years old, but he's an epileptic. And in 1855, he would have been thought of as some sort of a fool. Blanche Fleur was his school teacher, Blanche Flowers, and the Red Knight was a slave trader named Cooper, and he arranges for his death, and he has a heroic dog, a large Tibetan Mastiff, who protects him and tries to see him through all this. So that was the subplot, and he is thrown into this situation where he is a messenger in more ways than one. You didn't have local mail delivery then. You could send a letter to New York or maybe to London, but businesses needed messengers to take care of communications with customers and other businesses with whom they dealt and so forth. So Andreas was all around the town, and he was both a participant and an observer. And he sees these horrific things and survives them somehow. And he is able to find what he needs to find and do what he needs to do. So it's a story about responsibilities carried out. And this is good. When I first talked with Tim Tomes about speaking to you, he thought it might not be the worst idea to mention just a few of the things that occurred to me, insights, if you will, that I was surprised at when I wrote the book, and there were several of them. Now, we've heard in rather exhaustive detail from Tim and from the representative from the Hibernians of the actual event. It's kind of cloudy in time because it's a long time ago, but it was only 77 years, which that's not an uncommon single lifespan, between the first settlers on Corn Island and the Bloody Monday riot, when Louisville was, at the end of that 77 years, was the 10th largest city in the country and had a population of roughly 50,000 people. Most of the people were English or Scots, Irish descent, and they were Protestants. They were the majority, but that majority was narrowing. There had been revolutions in Europe in 1848 that failed, and many Germans fled when the counter-revolutionaries came looking for them. Many people came from Ireland because of the potato famine, so-called. I think it's a legitimate question which has never been answered. How can a country that exports food have a famine? How is that possible? But they were, after all, under the thumb of the English, and that's not the first time that something like this has happened. The majority of the Germans who came were from the southern part of Germany, and they were primarily Catholic. Virtually all of the Irish were Catholics, and this did not go over too well with the people who lived here and the power structure. And it wasn't just that these people wanted to drink beer on Sundays or something like that. It was everything. I think the native-born people were honestly afraid that these people were going to at least try to take over. In the 1840s, there became prominent in the country a political party that didn't last a long time, but was very much involved in Bloody Monday. We had the Democratic Party, which was later called the Party of Slavery, who often was in power. And then, of course, you had the Whig Party, WHIG, which is a lot like our Republican Party today, and they were phasing out. They had lost the energy, they had lost whatever it was that kept them going, and Henry Clay was gone, and so a new party was formed. It started out as a secret society in New York called the Star Spangled Banner. And it was later eventually called the American Party. It was a nativist group which stood for the notion that native-born people were better than immigrants, and immigrants were suspicious and difficult. And it seems like an unkind thing to say, and maybe it doesn't sound very ecumenical, but there was a streak of anti-Catholic sentiment that ran right through the United States from the days of the earliest settlers. When we were kids, you know, we were taught about the Pilgrims and how they came here for religious freedom. And of course, these were the same people who claimed that they were killing witches. And the last thing in the world I think they were concerned about was religious freedom, certainly for anybody other than themselves. But the American political party had some prominent people. What comes to mind, there's Samuel Morse, who was the inventor of the Morse code and the telegraph. General Sam Houston, a holy name in Texas. A preacher by the name of Lyman Beecher, who was the father of Harriet Beecher Stowe, who wrote Uncle Tom's Cabin, probably the most famous book of the day as the Civil War approached. And then, of course, we had John Wilkes Booth, and we've all heard of him for other reasons. He was a know-nothing. The know-nothing came from, perhaps one of the other speakers has explained that. If they did, I didn't catch it. It started out as a secret society, and when they were asked questions, they were told by their leaders, when they were asked questions about what the party stood for, what their platform was, etc., they were to say, "I know nothing." And a journalist got hold of that name and tacked it on the party, and they were known as know-nothings thereafter. The important thing I think to remember about a book like this, if you read it or if you have read it, is the fact that it was another indication of a power structure between those who were primarily serving themselves, who were in positions of power and influence, and they didn't want any competition or problem from people who were not born here. And if you follow current events, and I hope you do, as you look at the vicious propaganda of the American Party, I think many of the slogans and the gestures are eerily familiar to certain things that are going on today, and apparently are going to go on for the foreseeable future. I would hope that if there are any specific questions that anyone would want to pose, but Tim is still here, and if there are any specific questions, we certainly would be happy to entertain them.
If everybody would like to unmute now. See if there are any questions.
Just speak up. We'll be fine. Can you hear me?
Yes, I do.
Do you have a
This is Jeff Ingram. And I was going to ask Gerald, when you what year did you write your book?
gosh, this is embarrassing. It's been over 20 years ago, and it's been around a long time. I never really got terribly far outside of Louisville, although we sold some books in places like Seattle and California and so forth. We sold somewhere around 4,000 or 5,000 books around Louisville. And I was just mentioning to the librarian here earlier, I don't know whether to take it as a...
now 7:30. In 15 minutes at 7:45, the department and the computer labs will close. No more materials will be checked out after 7:55, and the public library will close at 8 p.m.
Sorry about that.
Thank you.
I don't know what to make of it, but over in Louisville, the Louisville Free Public Library and its various branches had a number of copies of the book, and they were all gone. They weren't returned. I don't know whether to take that as a compliment or whether it just shows that Louisville readers are a little less scrupulous than those in Indiana.
Thank you.
As to anyone who would want to explore the book, I believe that there are some copies floating around on Amazon. I know that Jeffersonville Library has several copies. I'm going to see if I can't give them some extra copies. It could be available if someone wants to read it. And I don't think you will find the experience great.
Okay. Well, thank you all. Since there are no questions, I guess we will sign off. Hang on, I was hunting for that link so I could post it.
Want some popcorn?
You got the link there, Diane? You can post it to the chat for the book.
I could get it.
Hang on, I'm trying to get out of
But I will.
out of full screen mode. Tim, thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm going to put up the picture of the book cover.
Okay.
So it is available at Amazon.com. Just type in the title there, Andreas the Messenger.
Okay, well, if they search for that on Amazon, they'll find it. Yeah. Well, I'm going to stop recording now.
Thank you.
Perfect, everybody. Well.